January 19th, 2021 work session of the Salisbury City Council. We have 5 items on the agenda today. And first up is a presentation from Chesapeake Utilities Corporation. And I'll call on Shane Brakey to initiate the presentation and let us know who your team is.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to double check that you can hear me okay?
Perfect.
All right. Thumbs up. All right. Thank you, sir. Yes, Shane Brakey. I'm the Vice President of Chesapeake Utilities. Thanks for having us here today. I'm going to be joined with Steve Bassino, our Director of Government Affairs, Jared Shelton, our Commercial and Industrial Account Manager, as well as MQ Riding, who's our Marketing Manager who helped put this together. And we'll be all available for questions at the end of this presentation.
Thank you. Amanda, there you go.
Okay, so we'll just jump right into this. We can save the questions for the end, or if you'd like to ask questions throughout. We'll begin the presentation with Steve giving a background as to Chesapeake Utilities as a corporation. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll get right into it.
Thanks, Shane. Hi, Steve Bassino, Director of Government Affairs for Chesapeake Utilities. Thanks for having us be able to present to you. Just a quick background on Chesapeake Utilities before we get into the meat of the presentation, which is a discussion of our Somerset project. The company is over 160 years old. Dover Gas and Light Company was formed in 1859. In 1947, we incorporated into Chesapeake Utilities Corporation. 1948, we purchased Citizens in Salisbury, and in 1950 we began providing gas transmission throughout the Delaware and Maryland Eastern Shore through our company Eastern Shore Natural Gas. Next slide, please. So here's where we are in 2021. Currently are a diversified energy company. Our CEO is very proud to state that we have doubled the market capitalization of our company twice over the past decade. We currently have companies that serve natural gas distribution, transmission, and gathering processing, as well as marketing. We also have a very large propane gas distribution business that serves propane in Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and a couple of other states throughout the nation. Next slide, please. So as a corporation, we have 980 employees. We have slightly over 256,000 customers, and we have 33 certified minority suppliers that we do business with. This is kind of a snapshot of our service territory. So the map on the right, in the light blue, that's where we serve natural gas, and that is served by under the name of Chesapeake Utilities, except when you get to Worcester County, that is served by Sandpiper Energy. As I mentioned, gas transmission runs through the entire state of Delaware along the Eastern Shore, and that's provided by Eastern Shore Natural Gas. The gathering company that I mentioned is not shown on this map, but that's out in Ohio, and they are called Aspire Energy. Sharp Energy is our propane provider. And we have a company that delivers mobile CNG solutions for us, and it's called Marlin Gas Services. And we have the only public CNG filling station in Delaware. But what Marlin does is Marlin is able to transport natural gas to businesses and projects where the gas line is coming, but it hasn't quite been hooked up yet. And they're also able to provide mobile natural gas in emergency situations to restore customers quicker than a utility can get their service back on. Next slide, please. I want to break it down to our Maryland service area. We have 45 employees, almost 32,000 customers at 31,600 plus. We have 7,445 miles of gas main. And we're very proud of our service to the Maryland Food Bank, with our employees serving over 375 hours. So at this point, I just want to turn the presentation over to Jared Shelton, who will get into some extensive details on our Somerset project.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you, City Council members. My name is Jared Shelton. I'm the Commercial and Industrial Account Manager for Chesapeake. I'm proud to call Salisbury home. I've been a resident for a little over 20 years. I've been with Chesapeake a little over 5 years. We're going to talk about the origin of the project, how it came to be, and then the two main segments of the project. Next slide. So the project really began with a request for proposals issued by the state of Maryland, looking for clean natural gas solutions to serve Eastern Correctional Institute and University of Maryland Eastern Shore near Princess Anne. ECI being served currently with a wood chip burning combined heat and power plant that produces electricity and thermal needs there for the institution, and then also UMES, which is currently using a lot of propane and fuel oil. They want to convert from that to natural gas. Chesapeake responded to the RFP, was awarded the contract for ECI and UMES, and those two customers really are the anchor customers for this project, which make the extension to Somerset County possible. Now the project is really divided into two distinct phases, even though it's a single project. One of the phases is the transmission line extension that's being completed by Eastern Shore Natural Gas. And then the second phase is the distribution line extension being completed by Chesapeake Utilities. Next slide. This map on the right is just artistic representation of what the line will look like that Chesapeake Utilities is completing for Development Main from Eden, Maryland, down to UMES and ECI. Folks in Somerset County have been working hard to bring this to reality, natural gas for Somerset County for some time, to strengthen local business, fuel industry, increase job opportunities. But I want to spend a little time talking specifically about the portion of the project which runs through Salisbury proper. Next slide. And that's the transmission section. So you can see in the map on the right, a black dotted line that represents the path that the transmission extension will take from Commerce Street on the northern end and proceed south along existing right-of-ways, approximately 6.8 miles of 10-inch diameter mainline extension. And it follows roughly either Route 13 corridor right-of-ways or existing railroad right-of-ways. Next slide. Continuing, this shows the second half of that transmission line extension from roughly the Fruitland area down to where it will terminate in Eden, again following existing railroad right-of-ways and state highway right-of-ways. This path was chosen for a variety of reasons. One being is it was the shortest route from point A to point B, so to speak, but it's also the one which minimizes impacts to wetlands, waterways, other environmentally sensitive areas. And where it terminates in Eden is where Chesapeake Utilities will pick up. Next slide, please. But before we get there, before we get to Eden, again, this is just some detail. I'll just mention the fact that the main extension, both portions, the transmission line to Eden and the transmission or the distribution line rather from Eden to Princess Anne will all be directionally drilled underground. The pipe will be underground and not visible once installed, like much of our 120 miles of pipe that run in and around the Salisbury area currently. And this is done for a variety of reasons, but again, to really minimize the environmental impacts. It's drilled underground rather than like an open trenching type of installation where you dig a trench and drop pipe in. Next slide, please. So the distribution section, Chesapeake Utilities will pick up from where Eastern Shore Natural Gas ends their line in Eden and extend approximately 10 miles south through Princess Anne and terminate at the Eastern Correctional Institution that we'll have a lateral that comes off just north of Princess Anne to jog over to UMES to serve them. And of course, this project brings natural gas as an option to other folks, other residents, other business owners, which is why the economic impacts are so great. Next slide, please. Something we like to highlight about the project, the jobs and revenue expected to be created. At the end of the day, the net overall impact of the project is expected to be $76 million in construction spending, 1,500 new construction jobs, $16.7 million in local economic activity spurred by the project, and over $7 million in new local wage income spurred by the project. And next slide. At this time, I'll hand it over to Shane.
Okay, thanks, Jared. So I'll just close off here, and again, hopefully you can see me and hear me by talking about the project's benefits, but then also go into a little bit more detail on some of the benefits to Salisbury specifically. So next slide, please. So the project overall has a net positive impact on the environment. ECI is currently utilizing wood for their combined heat and power facility, and switching over to natural gas will have a substantial reduction in emissions there. And UMES is currently using number 6 or number 2 oil on their facility. Not too many state-run facilities still utilize oil as they do, and so they'll see a significant reduction in emissions also. That's equivalent to about 11,000 cars being removed from the road, and the ECI project alone will reduce its particulates by almost 100%. Next slide, please. This gives a representation of natural gas prices versus other fuels such as fuel oil and electricity. And as you can see, natural gas prices have been relatively stable over the last several decades, and judging by the forecast, it's predicted to stay stable into the near future. Next slide. And this gives you a better perspective of that reduction in energy costs. As you can see, natural gas is at some points up to a third or 2/3 cheaper than propane, and about half the price of fuel oil. Next slide. And we also wanted to talk about the other benefits of this project. One of the new initiatives on the Eastern Shore is the opportunities for renewable natural gas. There are facilities being proposed for Somerset. One project in particular being run by a company called Clean Bay plans to utilize the byproducts from the poultry industry to create, in essence, methane through a biodigester process. And the methane will be cleaned and usable within our facility, making it qualify to be called renewable natural gas. There are other entities in Somerset also doing the same thing. A company called Planet Found has been working in Pocomoke for several years on developing this industry. So there's a lot of opportunities to work with the poultry industry to help them with the issues that they have with their fertilizer and then some runoffs, and it'll be a win-win for the community in general. Next slide, please. And then we just wanted to close up with the next couple of slides just to highlight our focus here in Salisbury. We do have over 8,000 customers located within the city of Salisbury that are receiving natural gas, and about 1,500 business customers. We have great relationships with many of the large customers within the city's limits. We recently switched over the Holly Center from oil to natural gas. They had been on oil for some time, and within the last 3 years, we've made that transition. We work closely with PRMC. They have a combined heat and power facility there, and they were on oil prior to that and have switched over to natural gas. And Purdue, Warwick College, Salisbury State are also customers of ours. Next slide. And just to kind of highlight, maybe we should have put this slide up front, but just to highlight, you know, who we are as a company. We are a diverse company. We're all about equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have groups focused on women and energy. We're very active with our community. We've been recognized as one of the top workplaces in the region for at least the last 9 years. And we're proud of our relationship. And we do have an office located just outside the city limits and on Beaver Run, but we have another office for our Sharp facility in downtown Salisbury on Commerce Street. And then the last slide kind of highlights our commitment to the communities. We've sponsored the National Folk Festival, very active. I think last year, probably 50, well, the last year that they had it, we had probably 50 to 75 employees out there volunteering at the event, active with the Junior Achievement here on the Eastern Shore. And we're very committed to our community and try to give back as much as possible. So with that said, hopefully that gives you an overview of the company as well as the project. We're glad that and we appreciate that you allowed us the opportunity to come here and speak today. And we look forward to, you know, continuing these conversations and communications going forward. And we'd be happy to hear any questions you may have.
Jack, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Shane. Just for everybody's knowledge, Vera and I met with this group probably 3.5, 4 weeks ago. I think that's about right. And we had some concerns. First, somebody's not muted. There it is. Thank you. We had a couple of concerns. The first concern was that prior to the vote and prior to that approved this project over at the state level, we had no communication. The council had no communication whatsoever with Chesapeake Utilities relative to what the project entailed. There were a lot of rumors going around that we could not answer, like, well, they're going to use existing lines and et cetera. That was one. And then that came up during the discussion. One of the concerns that Mira and I had was when I brought up the fact that our rail trail project was coming up and it was going to start soon. You guys were not made aware of that, or were aware of that. And my concern is, how does it impact it? Now, I know you've gotten a copy of the plans, and I'm just wondering, do any of those, any of our plans and your plans affect the same areas?
Yep. So, Mr. President, again, we do want to apologize for the lack of communication that we had up front. You know, it's a different environment that we're in, but there's no excuse for us not being in front of you more than we are. So I do promise going forward that will change, and we'll have regular communications, even if there aren't projects going on. And I apologize for that. But with that said, as far as the rail to trail project you're speaking about, I'd like to hand it over to Jared if he's available, because he's been having conversations regarding that and probably can provide more detail than I can.
Thank you.
Sure. No, we took the concern there and followed up on that with Amanda Pollock and Will White at the city. Talked through the scope of our project, the alignments involved, and specifically the question of what, if any, negative impacts there would be, and in what ways, if there are common areas where we're working, if we can, not negatively impact the project, but help the project in any way. I think we have a good conversation started with the city in that regard. I don't know if Amanda wants to add anything. I think at this point where things kind of sit is we don't believe there are any areas that are obvious where the project will negatively impact the rail to trail project. But the conversation is not over. We want to keep communication open throughout our project and then also through the rail to trail project to see if there's any ways we can help. Does that answer?
Thank you, Jared. I don't want to beat a dead horse. It would have been great to have this discussion up front because right now the project's approved, correct? And there's nothing that can be done if there is a conflict, correct?
Nothing that can be done with the pipeline side of it.
Well, either or just the inconvenience, the disruption. I mean, yeah. It is approved, correct?
Yes, it is. So the project that's going through the city, it was it's a transmission project that's being regulated by the FERC, and so the FERC has approved that project. But we'll work closely, making any kinds of modifications that are allowable if necessary. From all intents and purposes, we don't foresee that there's going to be any concerns. And our hope is that not only are we going to be able to, show that here shortly, but then come up with ideas on how we can actually help support the rail to trail project even further.
Okay. Let me turn it over and see if there are any other questions from any of the other members, because at this point, it's moot relative to the permit. But I trust Amanda explicitly, and hopefully this will have minimal impact. But as you know, we sent a letter in non-supporting this project for the reasons we stated in the letter. So let me ask Mr. Boda, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I think you raised our concerns. The letter speaks for itself. And, in our discussion, one of the major concerns was any impact to our bike facilities along that rail to trail, because we didn't want to have to install something and then they do something, or conflict during the construction of both. So those are major issues. Like you said, I trust Amanda, who on a day-to-day basis will handle this. So.
Thank you, Mr. Boda. I would also, at this point, before I forget, I would like to have an update on this on a monthly basis, even if it's only 2 minutes and no progress. I'd like to know what's going on, so we can do that probably at the first, and Mrs. Nichols, if you make a note of this, the first work session of the month. Let's do that. And then we'll have that as an automatic thing until this project is complete. I don't see Ms. Jackson on the line. April, are you on the line? No, then I'll skip to Ms. Blake.
I don't have any questions at this time. I just, want to reiterate, we are concerned about the impact on our environment. But I think the presentation tonight really was very helpful to see that and to get a better scope of how and other things you're doing to minimize harm to the environment. That's the biggest concern we have. thank you for that presentation. It was very helpful.
Thank you.
This is Gregory.
Yeah, hi. I'm going to have a few questions. So first of all, is this pipeline going to be carbon neutral? And if not, how does the company plan on offsetting the carbon it produces?
So at this time, it hasn't been determined to be carbon neutral, but I can tell you with our efforts with the renewable natural gas, if we're able to get some of these projects in line to the scale that they're talking about, could be project neutral. And also, we would like to also state that, we as the distribution system and the pipeline, for those large customers, they can choose where to source their natural gas. Somewhat just like an electric customer can choose to have their electric from wind or solar. Something similar can be done on the natural gas side, that they can choose to have it sourced from an entity that's carbon neutral also.
Okay. And another question I had was, what is the plan to keep the cost for consumers low as other energies become more readily available, like solar and wind? Like I saw your cost chart. You say it's going to be pretty stable, but let's be honest. Wind and solar is getting cheaper and cheaper all the time. How are you going to compete with that once they become cheaper than natural gas, which is not far from now?
Yeah, right. And we are regulated by the Public Utility Commission to them that our rates are justifiable, but we're pretty proud about how we've been able to keep our distribution rates low. We haven't been in, at least in the Maryland area, in for a distribution rate increase for some time now. So it is an effort that we just have built into our culture to keep our prices as low as possible, ensuring we're doing things that are economically prudent. And so, I'm hopeful that that answers your question, but it is something that we strive to do regularly.
Well, it's just something that's been on my mind because, the state has set percentages for, renewable or green energy that we need to meet. And I believe the amount was 50% of our energy needs to come from renewable sources by 2030. How long will it take for that renewable gas, and what would be the environmental impact for the people around those sort of processing plants?
If the renewable gas works as far as what the business's timeline states, they are hoping to have something available within the next 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I would also like to just say, we as a company, we don't feel like we're competing against the winds and the solars. We actually want to work with them. And there's a lot of aspects where natural gas works in parallel with those sorts of energy sources, as far as when the sun's not out, when the wind's not blowing, those sorts of things. But, we're not anti any of these alternate fuels. We just want to be able to provide the best solutions for the end users, whatever that may be. And so with that, we want to make sure that, we're keeping the prices down. And we're all from this community. All the people on this call are from the Delmarva Peninsula, and we care about the environment too. And so we have those same sorts of incentives for us to make sure that we're reducing all of our carbon footprints, not just in the products that we're providing, but also, in our offices and in our daily life.
Yeah, I've got concerns about it because this is fracked gas coming from Pennsylvania, even though Maryland has a fracked gas ban. From my understanding, that this is going to be coming from fracked gas. So, that's a concern for me, is the impact that these sort of facilities are going to have on our environment locally. But that's about it. That's what I've got.
Okay, and with that last item, like I said, ECI and UMES and our customers, there's choices for the source of their natural gas is diversifying, so they can choose at some point to not get the gas from the Pennsylvania. Natural gas, the infrastructure is throughout the United States, so there's natural gas coming from the Gulf of Mexico, there's natural gas coming from Colorado, and then but a lot of it is coming from Pennsylvania. But there'll be options down the pike from where they get their gas source.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I think Ms. Jackson has joined us. April, any questions for the gentleman?
No, not right offhand. No, I don't.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. We appreciate your support in the past, but we're going to hold you to it. I'm going to hold you to it. We want to have discussions in a timely manner. We want to be part of the discussion and part of the solution. And now we're sitting here and the decision's been made. And now we're trying to make sure that we prevent any damage to or interference with our own projects. So thank you for coming. Thank you. This is the second time we've been through this for Mir and I. We appreciate it. Amanda, you know what we're going to have to do, and let's have that update once a month until we see how this is going, if it's going properly. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up on the agenda, we have a presentation from the Environmental Policy Task Force. Our Director of Infrastructure and Development, Amanda Pollock, is going to handle that. I'm sure she's going to lean on Alyssa Hastings. Floor is yours, Amanda.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, we are very happy to be here tonight to talk about the Environmental Policy Task Force final report. And I will be asking Alyssa to do the presentation along with Dave Namazi, the chair, in just a moment. So I just wanted to bring a couple of really quick things to your attention. As you know, Mayor Day called this task force together. They convened the task force in February of 2020. So they actually had their first meeting in person. Everything else has been done virtually. So this was a group of dedicated citizens who cared about the environment and seeing Salisbury grow and become more sustainable. The task force chair and the chair of all the subcommittees presented to the department heads last week. So your city staff has heard this and been able to provide some input. And after you hear the presentation tonight, I did want to point out that I've put forward a resolution for you all to consider to adopt this report. And in that resolution, I noted that we'll give you yearly progress reports in January of every year as a way to hold us accountable and to make sure that you're aware of what we're doing to keep forwarding these sustainability goals throughout the upcoming short-term and long-term goals. So with that, I will turn it over to Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Council President Heath, members of the council, thank you so much for allowing us to present tonight. This has been one of my larger projects this past year, and it has just been an absolute honor to serve as the staff representative on this committee. As Amanda mentioned, we were convened back in February originally by Mayor Day, and then boom, it was a global pandemic and we couldn't meet in person. And over the summer, we reached out to all of the task force members and said, what would you like to do? Would you like to continue meeting? Should we move virtually? Should we hold off until we can meet in person again? And it was unanimous that everyone wanted to continue the task force deliberations. And I think that's really a testament to the citizens and the community leaders that really see environmental sustainability as a priority. And so I'm so thankful for all of the task force members. As Amanda mentioned, we have a very diverse group of stakeholders that were on the task force with 22 members. We have representatives from Purdue and the hospital and consultants and educators and local environmental nonprofits. So we really work to try to make the group as well-rounded as possible. And the group met via Zoom. We had a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations about what does a sustainable Salisbury look like? What should we be doing for the next 10 years when it comes to sustainability and our environmental policy? Because we get so caught up in the day-to-day that we often don't take the time to look towards the future. And this is an area that's really important to plan for the future. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background to all of you. I also wanted to give a special recognition to Michelle Gregory for serving, Councilwoman Michelle, as the council representative on the task force. It's wonderful that we were able to have you participate in so many meetings and bring you along through this process. You were absolutely a key piece of this process, so thank you so much. And I also want to just recognize there's a bunch of the members of our task force and as well as our green team that are on tonight's call. So thank you to everyone who's joining us today. So I will now turn it over to the chair of our Environmental Policy Task Force, Dave Namazi. Dave is the Chief of Staff for the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and has been our leader through this process. And we'll go through our PowerPoint. So Dave.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Council President and Council members for making time in tonight's agenda. We really greatly appreciate it. This was a lot of hard work by the citizens of Salisbury. And I would also say there was a fair amount of interaction with the city department heads and helping to forge recommendations, which were really important to get these recommendations right and to get the feedback that we wanted. So thank you really not only to Alyssa and Amanda, but also to the city department staff. That was really helpful. If you could go to the next slide. We broke into, as was mentioned, we broke into 5 different subcommittees, and that was to, one, kind of get our arms wrapped around this big issue and challenge of what is sustainability to the city. And I would say that my cat wants to join in on this conversation, so I excuse, sorry about the meowing in the background. This is the beauty of Zoom meetings in 2020 and 2021. So we had 5 different subcommittees. I should also mention that in 2008, this committee also was formed. They developed a report. One of the first things that we did was look at that prior report. We got an update of success from Amanda and the city leadership and Alyssa to really determine what made progress, what didn't make progress. That was really helpful because that kind of helped forge a basis of how to move forward. We also looked at how that report was formalized and see what we could learn from that and what we could kind of incorporate or steal from the past report. And then finally, one of the important things, we had different categories. One of the categories we really didn't have in that last report was about education and outreach. And whether that was an oversight or a conscious decision, I can't quite remember. But we all felt it was really important to have in this report. And so I'm going to go through sort of the most important recommendation in each of these 5 categories. You have the report in front of you. You could certainly ask questions about any of the recommendations, not only the ones that I may highlight, and go from there. So next slide. One of the other things that we added to each recommendation, so we have a synopsis. Each recommendation has each of these 6 elements: a synopsis, benefits and barriers, actions required. What we thought was also really important was what were the climate change implications to each of these recommendations, and how do we talk about diversity and justice, and whether making improvements, will that have a negative or positive impact on diversity and justice, or should we be doing it because there's already a negative impact on diversity and justice, and therefore should we make progress on it associated with that? And then, of course, there was a priority level and a recommended timeline. One of the things related to priority level, and I just want to make this point clear, is that we did them as immediate, medium, and long term. And because something is immediate, that's what I'm going to focus on. It's not that we could necessarily do those things immediately, but that we think it's really important to start making significant progress on in the short term. But I would encourage everyone, and I mentioned to this when we met with the city leadership, department leadership that all the recommendations should be seriously considered, because the task force members considered them all very seriously. So next slide, please. So first and foremost, and I'm going to have to just look at my notes a little bit through this, so bear with me, but I just want to give a thumbnail on these top issues. So the first one is embed energy and emission assessments within city planning. And this is really important. One, we just heard in the last presentation a little bit about the importance of not only goal setting, but meeting those goals. One way to really be able to do that is to track it. If you don't track it, you have a sense that you made progress, but you're not really sure. You sometimes lose what you may have thought was a priority, but isn't actually getting the attention that you wanted. And while there is certainly some energy assessments and carbon assessments taking place within the city, we feel it's important for that to be an ongoing process, not only to, sometimes you have to go to external experts to help get that information and knowledge, but also consider ways to build expertise within the city itself to be able to move ahead with this is really important, and or to interact appropriately with those experts at a high enough level, so you know how things are working out. This is really critical to moving forward on many of these sustainability goals, and as Council Member Gregory mentioned earlier, the state has significant goals in terms of its greenhouse gas reductions that they're looking at everyone to help meet, not only state resources. And I think the city can not only look at its own assets, but help the entire city and the entire community meet these goals. This is the big problem that's facing us currently within the next several decades. Salisbury, being a community that is a waterfront community, has particular stressors that are going to become clear due to continued climate change. Next recommendation. So another one of these is the stormwater trash inserts, and the city has made some progress on these. There's a couple handfuls worth of trash inserts. There's a recommendation that suggests that this be expanded by adding about 10 more inserts per year for the next several years in stormwater drains that are particularly collecting trash. Obviously, and this came up in our discussion with the city department heads, you want to focus these, you want to focus two things. One, you want to focus these in areas where there's a lot of trash coming in the stormwater, but you can't do it just by the inlet itself. You have to do it in association with an education program to help reduce what's being kind of thrown out of the car window, left out of the home, or just general litter. And so these inserts are really important to have. They do cause other complications. They need to be cleaned out regularly. There are certainly some real challenges with these inserts, but it is really key to keeping the stormwater and the outflow of the stormwater clean. And it also helps meet some of the city's MS4 permitting goals as well, which is critical to MDE and the city itself. Next recommendation. So this one is a bit more challenging, but it is worth mentioning. There's a sense, at least of the committee, that the staffing for the parks and recreation in general could be increased. There has been some increases recently. There probably needs to be continued to be some increases. And the thought was really to have a cohesive program that ends up with a lot of other good goals being met, that the city needs to begin really considering its own parks department or parks and rec department moving forward. Right now, it is sort of spread around with different people with different skills, having some of those responsibilities. but it's not perhaps as focused as it could be moving forward. It's not to say there wouldn't need to be continued linkages with the other departments. It's just that perhaps that focus would really add a lot to the city's parks and rec assets, which are not insignificant. And so adding that could be really important moving forward. I think there's a recognition that to do some level of a reorganization is never easy and it's never painless, but that it's important to move toward that direction, and that some of the other recommendations within this broad category of managing public open space could probably be achieved easier if there was a central focus of a parks and rec department. Next recommendation. So this one is really timely because that there's some rewriting currently of the zoning, Salisbury zoning code, and that there is a need and a thought to really reduce sprawl, have better linkages between the open space of the city and the community that it serves, ways in which that density could either be concentrated appropriately and or redevelopment zones, and how that could work through. And this is all kind of under the aegis of smart growth zoning. And it's really can be key, as everyone here knows and every council member knows, that smart growth is very much a futuristic program. You don't just like turn it on and all of a sudden see change. This is incremental change, but that you have to get it set up the right way. And to the degree that the codes can help, that is really key. This is something that, depending upon the state administration shrinks and grows. There's also some thought about establishing a transfer of development rights to the extent that that's feasible, and how that may work between the city and the county. That's no small lift to develop a TDR program that's actually effective and can work and flourish. But it's one that is that needs to be thought about and determined, and that could lead to the long-term growth and health of both the county and the city. So this is one of these that could really be a win-win for the broader community and the whole region. Next. The last one is really related to nuisance flooding. I don't think there's anyone here that hasn't experienced nuisance flooding in the city of Salisbury. The drive arounds Fitzwater Street and other areas is sometimes confounding and surprising. And part of that is because as it's known, is not only nuisance flooding, but also sunny day flooding. So how could you have a beautiful day, no rain, no big winds, and all of a sudden you're still flooded and you got to do this drive around? And it's because unfortunately sea level rise is starting to take its toll in this community, and we're starting to see the impacts of that. So these are generally coming not only from big storm events or moderate storm events, but also from what are called king tides, part of the normal tidal cycle monthly. And this could be a real challenge. It's really hard to change streets. It's really hard to elevate things or stop water from moving. Water is always going to go to the path of least resistance. And why this may be under education and outreach is because we feel strongly that one of the communities that's impacted in this is a very low income community, where an education program associated with how to live with this nuisance flooding, where the health impacts are minimized, and where you could do some small things to help to minimize mold or to recognize when you may have a significant mold problem may be really important for the community health. The recommendation is that an education and outreach program be focused on the neighborhoods that are impacted by nuisance flooding, and this should probably be a multilingual effort and not just in English. With that said, hopefully there are some long-term fixes. Hopefully, we've all learned from this, and there won't be some additional development going in areas that would be projected to flood in the near term. Some of the amount of sea level rise that's projected for the eastern shore of Maryland can be quite concerning on the order of feet in the next 50 to 100 years, and under some of the worst case scenarios. And we recognize that this is gonna still continue to impact multiple communities if the whole country and world don't start reversing some of the impacts. So I guess I want to end on a couple things before taking your questions. One, a real serious shout out to the members of this task force. They really have worked very hard and diligently. We were really pressing to get this report done before the end of the calendar year, and we were successful in doing that. And that was only because everyone was willing to roll up their sleeves, pull recommendations together, and really have an honest and forthright discussion about what some of the priorities should be moving forward to the city. Now, having said that, I think it's really important for the council members, as well as for the city department leadership and the city staff beyond that, really consider what is low-hanging fruit. We may have been wrong on some of this stuff, but what is low-hanging fruit? Even if it might be a lower priority, is that pretty easy to incorporate? If so, progress is progress. We know that we all know that we need to make a lot of changes in a lot of different areas to make a significant difference. So, Alyssa, did I forget anything? Amanda, that should be reiterated or stressed or anything else?
Steve, I think that was great. I will just add, just with the public open space recommendation, part of why the group felt that it was so important to have those staffing recommendations is oftentimes we heard from our own field operations department is that they're so understaffed and that they often have to go to a less environmentally friendly method of whether that's handling weeds or maintaining a park or whatever it is. And that's sort of one of the connections there is with more staffing, they would be able to do less spraying and less environmental harm. And so I just wanted to point that out. But I think that you did a great job with the overview. There's 52 recommendations, a lot to boil down.
Right. Thank you. And if you want to, yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much, Dave. That was very informative. I'll open the floor now for questions from the council. Mr. Boda?
No questions. I just want to thank all the volunteers for the committee, all the hard work they've done over the past year. And we're always grateful for people who volunteer and participate in our committees, because it's oftentimes hard to find people willing to take time away from their family and other parts of their life to help their community. So we're very appreciative of everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mir.
Thank you.
Ms. Jackson?
I have no questions, but I concur with Mir, certainly.
April, you're muted.
I concur with Mir, and I have no questions. And it's certainly great to have the members of the committee come together and do such an awesome job. So continue doing what you do. Thank you, Alyssa, for your leadership.
Thank you, April.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Blake?
It was a wonderful presentation. It was very informative. It's kind of a heavy lift. There's a lot of recommendations in there, and I'm certain we're committed as a city to pull this together. Very well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. Mrs. Gregory?
I just want to give a shout out to County Councilman Josh Hastings for the amount of work that he put into it too. He put a tremendous amount of work into it, but the entire team was just a dream team. These guys worked so hard on this. They put so much time into this, and I'll never forget the look of horror on Josh's face when I asked him to cut something down a few pages. But, oh my gosh. But, you know, the amount of time and work that went into this, it's just amazing. And y'all were rock stars. And I feel like I didn't contribute enough because you guys were just doing so much work. You know, but this is really the recommendations you guys and Dave for herding all the cats and getting this all organized into one sensible document. You know, you and Alyssa both, that was hard work. So well done, guys.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First, I want to commend you all. I read the document twice, and it is probably one of the most well-written documents that I've seen. There was very little fluff, which I don't enjoy reading fluff, but there was very little fluff. And I like the idea that you're prioritizing, which makes it much easier. I do have a question. Are you going to keep Gantt charts on each of these projects so that we know where we are? Because that would be a great asset for me as an engineer to, if I can get those Gantt charts, I'll know where we are and can maybe make comments about things that I see. So I see Amanda shaking her head yes. So something like a Gantt chart. There are other methods too, but I'm familiar with Gantt charts. But it was a great job. And I take it from the comments from the council members that we have consensus to move the acceptance forward. So we will do that. Mrs. Nichols, if we can get that on the agenda, that would be great. Dave, thank you for your leadership and herding the cats. Too bad you can't do it with your own, but that's okay. We'll let that slide. So thank you, everyone. And that takes care of that item on the agenda. Before I forget, I see a familiar face on the line, and he's in disguise. Theo, I see Theo on the line.
How have I disguised myself?
It's good to see you, Theo. Welcome.
Hey, how's everyone doing?
Good. Next up on the agenda is, and I put this on the agenda just as a reminder to check and make sure that the information on the parking on Fitzwater Street, the discussion we had, the information that Amanda sent out, is there any questions or comments relative to that? And did that answer the questions? Mr. Boda?
She answered the questions that we had.
Thank you. Ms. Blake?
Thank you, Amanda. That was well done. Yeah, it answered it.
April?
Answer my questions.
Thank you. Michelle?
My screen froze up, so I didn't hear anything. I apologize.
No, the question was, did you receive the stuff from Amanda, and does that answer any questions you had about the Fitzwater Street?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
I'm good. Thank
Thank
you.
Okay, that ticks that off. The next is an ordinance for the Critical Area Commission Grant and Aid Program. Amanda, you're up for that one.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as you know, last year, the city had adopted an ordinance for the Department of Infrastructure and Development to handle the Critical Areas Program. So we adopted that last year in February. And as part of that program, the Critical Area Commission will provide a grant for the city to help implement the program. So these grant funds can fund personnel costs and administrative costs in implementing the critical area program for the city. So we will get approximately $4,000 a year. We're recommending to utilize that money for the city planner's salary. This year, I'm recommending a budget amendment, and that's what's before you today. In future years, we will put that in the budget and have it be part of Schedule C, since this should be something that we can expect to have every year from here on out. So before you today is a budget amendment for $4,000. We will put the $4,000 into the salary, and then there is an agreement that is before you on how we will administer that. We will provide a report to the Critical Areas Commission every year at their request, so that we can show exactly what we spent the money on. But certainly we're pleased to get that help in administering this program, and we will absolutely be able to utilize the $4,000 every year.
Thank you, Amanda. Any questions or comments? Mr. Boda?
No questions. Thank you for getting the grant, and I support moving it forward.
Thank you. Ms. Jackson?
No questions, no comments, move forward.
Thank you. Ms. Blake?
No questions and no comments, and yes, please move it forward.
Thank you. Mrs. Gregory?
No questions or comments, move it forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. We have consensus, Mrs. Nichols, so if we can get that on the agenda, I would appreciate that. And now we have a fair chance housing policy discussion led by Acting Mayor Julia Glanz and City Administrator and Joanna Cooper, our intern.
Good evening, Council. Thank you all for being here and allowing us to present to you on a really important topic that we've been starting to talk about a lot over the last couple of months at Council, and we will be continuing to have deep conversations in all areas of housing. I did just want to mention before I forget, Johanna has done a ton of research, which you are going to see here shortly. So I do want to thank Johanna. I want to thank Molly from Habitat, our HCDD team, the police department, Chief Duncan. It's been a team effort to try to tackle this one specific issue, which is really tiny in the scheme of things. So Johanna, if you want to go to the next slide. It's faster than PowerPoint, I think PDF is. So you all know we have been working with the Vulnerable Populations Task Force for the last 10 or so months since May. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about as well is housing. So recently, through a number of conversations, have been hearing about the barriers to housing. And again, there are many, and we have a pretty graphic to show you later on many of them. But that one piece that we're talking about tonight is around those that have been previously incarcerated. So our friends in Annapolis, our delegation will be discussing many packages that have to do with housing protections, and we're hopeful that many of those get passed to protect our community members here in Salisbury. There's just talking earlier to Cheryl Meadows with Salisbury Neighborhood Housing Services. The grant dollars that she got for rental assistance have so many strings attached to them. She's got hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank that she can't get out into the street. So we are just trying to streamline things and get people back in housing or in more adequate housing as well. So we dipped our toe into the water here a few years ago with Theo with our Housing First program. We were, as you know, the smallest city in the country that had started a Housing First program. One that was not, readily, welcomed in. This was a controversial topic and still is. We understand that the topic we're going to be discussing tonight also has some, fear around it that, is understandable in the community. So we're approaching this head on. But we have realized that individuals in the community are treated as with previously individuals that have been previously incarcerated are treated as second-class citizens here in Salisbury, here across the United States, and so we're trying to create a more equitable access to housing. So I just wanted to do that introduction. And I do want to say also, we have had initial conversations with Colin Zimmerman, who's on here, Coastal Association of Realtors, and Libby Weisner, who gave us some feedback on the presentation. But tonight is just a discussion. There's some options on the table, but there is no firm proposal right now. So just want to use this as an opportunity to learn with one another and then figure out the next step together. So Johanna, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oops, sorry. So to get started, I just want to highlight the demographics of the formerly incarcerated population, kind of within the state and locally. 1 in 3 adults in the United States have a criminal history of some kind. And in Maryland, that looks like 117,000 adults who are currently incarcerated or under some other type of criminal justice supervision. And as we all know, there's a disproportionate representation of minority groups. And so you can see the data here for the state, but individuals with criminal history are 10 times more likely than their counterparts to become homeless. And so again, for those minority populations, this is an even larger impact. And there's, again, that disproportionate impact on these groups. And it's also important to highlight that an overwhelming majority of individuals involved with the criminal justice system are convicted of or facing convictions related to nonviolent and drug offenses, which I'll get to that a little bit later as well. But in the county, or Macomb County, the jail rate is second highest in the state to Baltimore City. And also within the state, the recidivism rate is 40% within 3 years. So individuals are re-entering the system rather quickly. And a lot of this has to do with the barriers that I'll get to that prevent them from successful re-entry after release. So some of these barriers, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge the impacts of systemic racism. The mass incarceration has long been a challenge, and that just further impacts the population within prisons. And then obviously once they re-enter society, that creates a larger challenge. Many of the barriers to housing, including criminal history, are kind of an effort to continue these institutionally racist practices without being overtly or kind of explicitly racist. There's also an employment discrimination factor. Same thing with housing. Individuals are often asked for criminal history upon application. There's the housing barrier, which is what we're touching on tonight. And in kind of addition to that, the access is the income requirements. Most landlords require 3 to 4 times the rent and income, which for individuals trying to access even affordable housing, this creates a larger challenge as well, especially for those working minimum wage or other kind of low paying jobs. This is often considerably unattainable. Individuals with criminal history are also often denied access to most assistance programs. So to even meet the most basic of needs, that's often not available, and those resources are lacking. And for individuals preparing for release or upon release, there's very limited to almost no programs to support them in terms of education, job training, access to those vital basic services, things like that. So then that creates even further challenges in trying to reintegrate successfully. There's also a variety of homeless crimes, so things like public disorder, and things of that nature allow or create a cycle where individuals can continue to be kind of picked up and re-involved in the criminal justice system, which then creates that pattern of behavior, which just further incites the recidivism and all those other things that just keeps individuals lacking in terms of re-entering successfully. So to combat some of these practices, HUD put forth guidance in 2016, recognizing the disparate impact of including criminal history in the housing process. And so these were prohibiting blanket bans encouraging individualized assessments and increased transparency by suggesting that landlords and rental properties provide their policies upfront on their website and on applications. However, this was just guidance, and so several cities and some states across the US have created ordinances and programs to prohibit or reduce housing discrimination based on criminal history. So I want to touch on the kind of current practices. So on the federal level and in the state, there are several protected classes from housing discrimination. And Maryland takes that one step further than the federal level by expanding to sexual orientation and gender identity, among others, but still obviously criminal history is not included. In the 2020 legislative session in Maryland, the HOME Act was passed, and that expanded housing or extended protections from discrimination in housing based on source of income. And that was in an effort to reduce the amount of denials based on public assistance recipients. So that was one step in reducing barriers to those who are already in kind of vulnerable positions, but it still is not quite far enough yet. On the federal level, there are prohibitions for federally funded housing providers, so Section 8 and low-income tax credit properties. And that is the prohibition on renting to those who are registered on the National Sex Offender Registry, those with convictions of manufacturing methamphetamine and arson, murder, and prostitution convictions. And here locally, most landlords have a 7 to 10 year look back period on their criminal histories. And most of these policies are also not presented on the website or on the application materials and are relatively difficult to get access to, which is another challenge because individuals that are working at minimum wage jobs or have a variety of other challenges are spending time and sometimes money applying for these different housing options, and then are denied without even ever really knowing that that was a policy in place. And so in 2019, a study out of Minnesota for affordable housing providers kind of addressed or looked into some of the common misconceptions and common factors that impact individuals with criminal histories in terms of housing. And so some of the kind of most substantial findings were that marijuana and other minor drug possession charges, alcohol-related, minor public order, prostitution, and domestic violence charges were all found to have no impact on negative housing outcome. And the study defined negative housing outcome as failure to pay rent, late rent, evictions, sudden loss of tenant, things along those lines. Some other factors associated were with decreased risk of those negative outcomes were having 2 or more adults in the home, the presence of children, and having a higher income was shown to have higher stability within the home and less risk to the landlords or the property management companies. And finally, after 2 and 5 years for misdemeanors and felonies, respectively, there was found to be little to no impact on those negative housing outcomes. So that kind of combats the existing lookbacks that are very common, not only locally, but on a national level as well, especially because those are placed on all charges, regardless of if it's a felony or misdemeanor. So with that being said, those periods are considerably long in comparison to the impact on housing. So with all of that being said, there's a few different levels of kind of solution options that we're putting forward. The first is, or just kind of some thoughts to get the process rolling. The first is an outright prohibition on conducting criminal background checks and denying based on criminal histories. The second would require landlords and property management companies to present conditional offers, so making sure that applicants meet all other requirements, income, eviction history, things of that nature, and then conducting a criminal background check. Upon that offer, and then the background check will be completed, landlords can then consider and deny applicants based on property-related convictions that have occurred within 24 months of that application date. The third level, same thing with the conditional offer, and then at that point, landlords would be able to consider and deny on the basis of convictions that have occurred within 3 years of the application date, regardless of the nature of those charges. And the last and kind of option that can be included with any of these others would be requiring landlords and property management companies to share on their website and applications their look back period policies and practices so that individuals have access to that information upright and don't spend the time applying and going through those processes to just later be denied based on criminal history. And under any of these proposals, there is exceptions, and that's for where federal law applies to those federally funded housing providers, owner-occupied units. So when a landlord lives within the unit that they're renting, they're able to conduct criminal background checks and use their discretion in terms of denying applicants. And then the National Sex Offender Registry would be allowed to be checked under any of these any of the levels, and applicants can be denied based on registration. And even where these checks are permitted, landlords are going to be encouraged to conduct individualized assessments and take into consideration rehabilitation, mental illness, anything that could have an impact on their pattern of behavior and their conviction and their charge records. There's some other options as well. The first is an incentive program that would benefit landlords who are proactive in renting to individuals with criminal histories. And so this could look like a tax credit, reduced licensing fees, or increased access to potential tenants through referrals from housing agencies and other community partners who can refer individuals with criminal histories to those landlords. There's also a pilot program that started in the summer of 2020 in Delaware that allows individuals who are recently released to live with their family members in public housing for up to 3 years. And this program hasn't seen any enrollment currently, but it is a model that could be considered in the city. And so it's important, regardless of the level, that if we move forward with those, to address the impacts, the positive impacts of a fair chance housing policy. And so first and foremost, it reduces the idea of double jeopardy by removing one existing barrier. As we mentioned, there's a variety, but doing so takes one step forward in supporting this marginalized population in our community. It also reduces family separation. Lots of times parents are unable to reside with their children all under one roof as a result of these policies. And so that encourages stronger family units by allowing families to reside together. That can cause an increase in household income and a variety of other benefits when the family is able to stay together. It also promotes a safer community because individuals are housed. It's easier to maintain and stay. It's safer for the community when people are housed and not homeless. And it also, similar to the housing first idea, by providing housing, it creates a stable foundation from which individuals are able to build upon and then continue successfully re-entering and promote their own individual well-being. And so the next steps from here would be to meet with SAPOA and landlords and stakeholders to get their buy-in and their input on this project, and then develop legislation for the city, and then work on the other challenges. So you can see the graphic here, there's a variety of barriers, but it's important to at least take one step forward to chip away at these over or intersecting challenges that are presented here.
Johanna, if I could just jump in here.
Yeah.
As we've been workshopping this idea, we've come to realize that the lack of resources in our community is dramatic. Molly Hilligoss, who's with us, has a workforce training program with folks that are previously incarcerated, but she's only one group. Tri-County Council has some small things, but with with Poplar Hill pre-release closing, we spent a lot of city dollars to help fund that program and saw great return. It's just dramatic. So this is going, solving all of those pieces is going to take a huge amount of buy-in from the community, a lot of dollars, and a lot of time to develop it, but that's what's needed.
And that's all I have too.
Thank you, Johanna. Appreciate it. That's a tremendous amount of material too. It would have helped certainly if we had this ahead of time so we could have torn it apart. My head's spinning. actually right now. And I think that it's going to take a lot of work. And did I not see on there that public housing, you're not allowed to have people with criminal history? Is that correct?
There are certain exclusions, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Molly, do you want to add anything? You've been instrumental in this.
So 100% of all of the apartments in the Salisbury city limits have between 7 and 10 year look back period right now. And public housing, the Wicomico Public Housing Authority, am I getting that right? Wicomico Housing Authority, okay. That is now being managed by Penrose, that they have a 5-year look back. So I just want to commend Johanna and Julia and Avron. I mean, there's been so many people part of this conversation. It's important that we start bringing families back together. The positive impacts of families having 2 adults would increase household income. It could reduce the amount of government supports. Imagine the number of landlords that would be paid rent if there were 2 incomes in that home right now. So I don't see that this is probably going to take a decade, you know, to really see the fruits of all the work that's and the thought process. But in terms of systemic racism, this has been a hidden secret for many, many years. And we are seeing the impact on the educational system. You know, I grew up here and the schools look a lot different. It's not good. So mass incarceration, racial profiling, and this piece that because HUD did not put teeth into their guidance, it has just allowed people to be denied housing. And that discretion means denial for so many families. It needs to change. I applaud your efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Boda, any questions or comments?
Like you said, Jack, that was a lot of information and a great presentation, Johanna. And I think there's a lot of issues here, you know, a lot of pieces of the puzzle that, you know, when people are in these situations in their lives, they're not, you know, part of this is the educational system and what's happening there. And part of the breakdown of the family in some of our neighborhoods, you know, it's a tough issue. And, you know, people, you know, when you make bad decisions in life, sometimes it takes you years, you know, whether it's criminal, whether it's credit, you know, that stuff sticks with people for years. And so part of this is an educational failure at the beginning, you know, from when people are growing up, going through school and what they learn. And, you know, this is, you know, one piece of the puzzle, but this is going to take everybody being a part of this conversation. And this is not something that's going to be fixed by, you know, an additional regulation or an additional requirement on landlords or property owners. You know, there's a multifaceted approach to fix something that has been broken for decades. And, you know, it's, you know, but we have to, you know, in our own community, figure out, and anything that we do, we have to make sure that, are we in compliance with federal law? Are we in compliance with state law? Is what we're doing conflicting with anything? So, you know, this is not something that we're going to fix in 1 or 2 meetings. This is a conversation we've got to have for the next couple of years, and piece by piece, see what we can do. But we can't do it unilaterally. We have to have everybody at the table, has to be a part of the conversation, has to have input. We can't ram it down the throats of our business community. They have to be a part of this. So let's keep talking about it. Let's look forward and let's figure out as a community how we can fix this.
Well,
Thank you,
Muir, if
Muir.
I could just, can I just jump in real quick, Mr. President?
Sure.
To your point, Muir, I mean, again, I realize this is a heavy topic, and we just wanted to introduce it tonight. And I will send the presentation out so you can digest it further. And again, we're going to be having a lot of these topics on the agenda, but this is why there wasn't a firm proposal built into this conversation today. We supplied some options just to get your brain thinking, and we've started some conversations with the local landlord community, and we'll be continuing that over the coming weeks to think through some of the things that maybe we haven't from our perspective. So we'll be meeting with SAPOA and other groups, and then coming back to you with more of an outline proposal and to see where folks are. We can certainly put this back on the agenda next time to gather any further questions and thoughts that you may have as well.
Well, I know Ron Strickler has a couple of comments he'd like to make, and then we'll get the rest of the council. But I think that the first thing that should be done before we meet again is you should meet with the landlords, and you should meet with SAPOA as a whole and try to work out some things. But Ron, go ahead. What did you want to say?
I'm going to share my screen. I'm sure everybody can see that. It's a Word document. Is it up?
Yeah, but it's hard to read.
Okay.
You're right.
Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. All right, I'll just review it. I can share this document as well. Part of what we wanted to do was gather some information around what's happening right now in Salisbury. I know Molly spoke a little bit about it. Her team had basically reached out to all the apartment complexes in the city and provided us with that data. But we went ahead and contacted some local landlords and property management agencies just to take a look at what exactly we're seeing right now from landlords as it relates to criminal history. If you can't see this, I'm actually going to try and zoom in a little bit.
We can see it now, I think, a little bit better, but.
Okay. So criminal history look back periods essentially is how far back our property management companies or landlords are looking back. And you can see it's kind of all across the board. 10 years, I think one respondent said 10 years, two said 7, 5, 5. One was as much as the law allows. 3 were not sure. 4 did not disclose, and 2 companies did not complete criminal background histories. There's guidance, but there's really nothing set in stone. I know with the financial history, I believe it's 7 years, and it seems that most people are following along those lines. But what was interesting is the criminal history report and where they're getting their information from. And this is something that we can do to help protect our property management companies and our landlords. 4 people are actually using a software. What's unique about the software side of things is there's actually been a few lawsuits where software companies didn't say they had to participate in the Fair Housing Act because it didn't apply to their business. But with the guidelines as they relate to HUD's policies, if there's a disproportionate impact on minority individuals, then it does. And you've seen multiple lawsuits over the last year that were won, and I'll talk a little bit further about that later. So we want to make sure these software companies are doing their part, because ultimately our landlords or our property management companies are going to be the ones facing the trouble if there would be a lawsuit. 7 did not disclose where they received the reporting from. Again, 2 did not use reports. And then the interesting one was 8 respondents said they utilized the case search feature with the Maryland Judiciary website. So that is an issue within itself. Specifically, when you log on to judiciary case searches, and you can see here, I'm not going to read all through it, but under the second bullet point, that this information is not intended to be used as authoritative public record or as a legal document, and shall have no legal force or effect. It goes on to say on the website that case search should not be used for criminal background checks. They should be conducted through the criminal justice information system. So if we have landlords and property managers utilizing the case search feature to determine whether or not they're going to allow someone to live at their property is a big concern, more so for the property managers and landlords. So that's an educational piece that we can do on our end. because, you know, if they were ever to see some backlash or a lawsuit as it relates to discriminatory practices, they could find themselves, you know, in quite a bit of heat for that one. And then lastly, criminal background check disqualifier details. So what are they looking for? 13 of our respondents did not specify. One said whole criminal history, and 2 were looking for felonies. So the HUD recommendation is that it should be determined on a case-by-case basis. So we shouldn't be looking at particularly a felony or all felonies. And then also when we're looking at the case search, are we then going in and our landlords going in, property managers going in and ensuring that an arrest isn't disqualifying? Because an arrest, you know, with, you know, people are arrested or there's criminal history that shows up they're arrested, but they were never convicted or charged. That also leads to major issues, and they've seen lawsuits around it. So essentially, you know, it's not covered under the Fair Housing Act, criminal history, but it is covered under HUD, but they're just guidelines. But now they're applying these guidelines to the Fair Housing Act, which is why you're starting to see these lawsuits. And, you know, as we get further into this, I can share some of that information. I know you've been on the call for a long time, and I don't want to go too far.
Yeah, Ron, I think what we're in the weeds right now, and we can't be in the weeds right now because there's there's way too much information that's come across.
I just think it's an education piece, and I think it's multifaceted, just like Councilman Boda said. And I think the DOJ has to be involved. It's a big issue, and I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but you know, we could push the needle.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this reminds me a lot of the Environmental Protection Agency in business. You know, and I ran a business and I ran a nonprofit and I had problems. So you're right, it's multifaceted, and we'll get through it, but we're not going to solve it tonight. There's no way we're going to solve it tonight. So let me just get a couple more comments from the rest of the group. Ms. Jackson.
I've seen this happen, known it to happen. Maybe 8 years ago, I was at a meeting at Cathedral Love, and the question came up, how do we get the African-American men back into their homes? And I said, abolish the law where if they have a felony or they have a criminal background, they cannot be in the home with their children, especially if they're living in public housing. And when this young lady, Johanna, I think is her name, some of the things she said, reducing family separation and encouraging stronger families. We're dividing our families. We're separating our families. This is where the weakness is coming in. I remember some years ago, 2 young men murdered a man, and because they were living in public housing, their mother got evicted and the rest of their family. And it shouldn't be that way. It really shouldn't be that way. I feel as though when a person has done their time, and I understand about the criminal justice system, I understand about a lot of things when it comes to criminals. But we have criminals living in our community every day and don't even know it. So I'm for what's going on, but I do think that there's an educational piece, as Mira said, and Ron has said, and even you have said, Jack, and I think we need to dig a little deeper into this and find out what we can do to come up with resolutions, because if we don't, Christine's gonna be dealing with a massive amount of homeless people. The city of Salisbury is, because they're gonna be displaced. When the women, basically, because it actually goes towards the men more so than anything. When the women are handling the households and they're struggling and they have children, and the man gets out of prison and has nowhere to go. But some of them, I'm not gonna say all, want to be with their families and want to reunite and become stronger. Some do learn from their prison terms, some don't. But who are we to decide whether they are or have or not? We shouldn't be able to make that decision, but we should be a little bit more cautious of how we do things and how these landlords go through the credit background checks and how they pick and choose what they want to do and how they want to do it. I just think that there should be some kind of mandate where we actually come to some synopsis where we can make this better for everybody. Everybody. You know, we're not going to satisfy everybody, but make it work for the good of the cause. And that's all I have to say. And then we do need to meet together, and Ron needs to meet with Savoy and Chief and Ron, and get together, Christine, and have a good conversation on how we can do this, because right now we're on the losing end. We're on the losing end. And I don't think that we should be on the losing end. I think we should be winning right now. And that's all I have to say. I don't know if I offended anybody, and if I did, I didn't mean to, but I'm gonna be very vocal and say what I have to say. I've been offended by this for years. I mean, for years, to see this happen. And it is racism because it actually, to me, it was a ploy to separate the Black homes and our homes of color. That's just how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Angela?
It was a fantastic presentation. There was a lot of content in it. I do agree that we need to kind of break that down more. I know that the hour is getting late, but I know that Julia had said that Miss Libby Weisner had consulted on the presentation, and I really would like to hear what she thought about the presentation from just a different perspective than just somebody who is either working for the city or the city council, to see what she had to say about it. I don't know if we can invite her back, but I definitely think it's a broader discussion, and definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Angela. Michelle?
Well, I got to be honest, watching the whole presentation, I felt like I was having deja vu for every conversation I've had with April or with Amber on this topic, because we've had this conversation multiple times. So, you know, it is a lot to go through, and it's gonna take a while for us to get through it, but I think it's absolutely necessary work, and we need to do it. You know, and I really appreciate the effort and work that went into this presentation. I would love to get a copy of it and of the stuff that Ron put on the screen, because I couldn't read it. I'm on my little phone, so I couldn't read any of it from here. So if you guys could send that to us, that would be great, so I could have a chance to really read through it and become familiar with it.
Thank you, Michelle. From my perspective, I'm sitting here thinking, and my head is just spinning. The other thing that we didn't talk about is the disparity in crime. Someone is trying to feed their kids and steals a loaf of bread. That's one thing. A person, a man or a woman who beats the spouse is a different thing. And if they do it 2 and 3 times, it's a different thing. So all of these pieces that have to be put together, there has to be room to make sure that we protect the people and still allow the people their ability to get housing. And the other side of it, which I'm glad we're getting them involved, the landlords are in it for a bit. It's a business. And how does it affect when you have a 4-unit building, and you put let's go to the extreme, an arsonist with a history in that building? Could happen. Matter of fact, I know it could happen because it did happen once. But we can. There's got to be a way of doing it. I understand and I support it, the concept, but we have to be very, very careful. So I think we're on the right path. I think the major thing that has to be done is the administration has to meet with the landlords and get all their input. And there's a spectrum. I know a lot of them. And there's a total spectrum of them, from, hey, doesn't bother me, to the guy who wants to do a 20-year background check. And I know there's everything in between. So let's keep the thing going. Please get the information out to us. Ron, if you'll send yours out, Julia, if you'll get ours to the council, I would appreciate it. I appreciate everybody that's participated. Libby, thank you very much for your participation. Colin, I see John Cannon's on the phone, on the line. Is there anybody else that would like to speak for 2 minutes? Because right now we're supposed to be on an ESAM call. We start at 6 o'clock. So anybody else, please identify yourself, raise your hand, and I'll see if I can get you on. Chief Duncan?
I'll be brief. First of all, thank you for that presentation. I've been able to see it evolve from its initial roots, and I'm glad to see that multiple factors are being taken into consideration. So Johanna, good job on that. Molly, thank you for everything that you're doing in your attempt and your success in developing a kind of quasi reentry program. My commentary is going to be very simple and straightforward. Reentry is the issue here. I know that there are some severe barriers to housing, and I know that they create problems for our neighborhoods, but there are also factors that we have to consider with regard to those residents in those neighborhoods, also employees who work in these housing units and maintain them. Safety has got to come first and foremost, and that's a whole other topic unto itself. We see what the disparities are as far as incarceration rates versus how they relate to population sizes. And since we lost our reentry program here, you know, folks lose ground. They have no financial literacy. They have no conflict resolution skills. They're not coming out credentialed anymore. They have no opportunity for gainful employment. They don't know housing literacy. So to simply state, you know, that the housing issue is the only focus, I think we're losing the bigger picture of it. So thank you for being inclusive in that presentation, and I look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you, Chief. Colin, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, the Chief, you said a lot of what I was going to say, which is it's a big issue, and everyone said that today as well, that there's a lot of different parts that need to be addressed. We've obviously been in conversations already with Julia, and you know, as an industry, we welcome to come to the table and be part of this conversation. I think stakeholder meetings and continuing conversation, there is ways that we can do better. But it's going to take some work, and it's going to take some talking.
Thank you, Colin. Appreciate it. Anybody else who would like to just raise your hand? I can see you. Okay, it's been a long night. I thank you. We've had some great discussions and presentations. We're at the beginning of the journey, not at the end. And it's going to take a while, and we appreciate everybody's participation. And the more data you get, the better off we are. So thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.